Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 112 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy and international news and then give analysis on those issues. The podcast can be found at thelibertarianinstitute.org, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, or the Facebook page Kyle's Files. So this is November 1st, 2007, and of course the big news of the day was the terror attacks that occurred yesterday in New York City, just, I believe, right around the grounds of the World Trade Center, so reminiscent of 9/11 and, all that kind of other stuff going on. The terrorists used a rental truck from Home Depot. I mean, you could look at the pictures. It's really just something really crazy about having that Home Depot truck, starting at $19.99 or something with the blood on it. It was a very interesting photograph. I guess he drove the truck down a bike path, killing 8 people and wounding over 10 others. I believe 2 of the dead were Americans. 1 was a Belgian woman and 5 were Argentinian tourists. I'm, not sure. Other than that information, anything about any of the victims. After driving on the bus crash, the bike path, the truck that the man was driving crashed into a short bus, and then I guess the man got out with 2 fake weapons and police shot him. Now, I think one of the most, kind of unique portions of this story is that the man did not die. And unlike in the past terror attacks, the police now have this man in custody. I believe from what I read that this man is 29 years old. The man was born in Uzbekistan and came to America in 2010. I'm not sure if he's an actual American citizen or not, or just a Uzbek living in America. Apparently the man, is likely Muslim, as he is reported to have been shouting Allahu Akbar. And so this is, kind of where we are right now is we have another jihadist Muslim terrorist attacking New York City. This man, unlike, the original terrorists was not an Arab, but of, a member of the Muslim world in Asia. Of course, Uzbekistan borders Afghanistan, where the United States has been fighting a war for several years. There are plenty of Uzbeks who live in Afghanistan and are typically part of the Northern Alliance that makes up America's fighting force in Afghanistan. So, I mean, who knows what this man's motives are at this point. Maybe he will talk, maybe he won't. There are some reports that Trump, I guess, is at least considering sending this guy to Guantanamo Bay. That, of course, would be one of the worst tragedies of the terror attack, would be for Trump to then take more powers for the presidency and the federal government by sending not only a new detainee to Guantanamo Bay, but sending a detainee from America out of the country to a military prison. As details unfold and as they are relevant to foreign policy, I will certainly bring them to this podcast. I don't have a whole lot else to add to that. I think if anybody wants any details on this, it's all over the, 24/7 on all the news channels and everything. So what I want to do with the rest of the show is, spend the time talking about all the other stories that aren't getting talked about because everybody else is pretty solely focused on the terror attack. The first is that we have some big news coming out of kind of both camps on Russiagate. The first is that Paul Manafort, who was an employee of the Trump campaign, and his former deputy Rick Gates have been, I guess, had warrants issued for them, and then eventually decided to turn themselves in. They were then placed under $5-10 million bail or some ridiculous number and sentenced to be under house arrest. I think that's an interesting point in the story, just to show that how an average American would be treated if they were facing this much time in prison, and then Manafort's and Gate are going to get to live in their mansions of homes. I mean, they live in really nice homes and they're going to be there, and so how they get to do their time compared to everybody else, it really just shows a lot of the problems that we do have in the U.S. Now, the charges came out of the Mueller investigation, which of course was investigating Russiagate, and this seems to at least be, the only charges or the biggest charges the Mueller investigation will bring. So, from the Republican side, they're kind of touting this as a victory. Yeah, Paul Manafort, I guess, will be a martyr for the Trump campaign, but if this is all they have, this really has nothing to do with Russia. It just has to do with Paul Manafort laundering money for some very rich and, probably very bad people for a good amount of time. And I'm sure that they'll make a big deal out of how he was cheating the Americans out of their tax dollars and whatever else. But while I'm sure Paul Manafort's kind of a bad person, this in no way proves any collusion between the United States, Donald Trump, and Russia. And so I think, hopefully one of these days we can move on from this Russiagate thing. Now, the more interesting story I found on Russiagate, and that was that we now know that the DNC Hillary campaign was actually giving money to the organization that produced the Steele dossier, which, infamously claimed that Trump liked to pee on women in Russian hotels, and that Putin knew this and was blackmailing Trump for it, or could blackmail Trump for it. So this seems to be a much more obvious and significant case of collusion than anything that Trump possibly did with Russia. I know that I've done several episodes on Russiagate throughout the time, because Russiagate, especially in the early days of the Trump administration, was a very significant story. Trump had ran on a platform where he was at least saying that he was thinking about moving closer to Putin in Russia, and that, he didn't see any reason for the United States and Russia not to get along and work together in Syria. And really, this would have been a positive move in American foreign policy, even though it wasn't the best move. However, quickly after the election, the DNC and the Democrats and the Hillary campaign, and then some, jealous never Trump conservatives started pushing this message of Russia had the campaign. Several past episodes debunking all this. If anybody wants to go back and listen to those, there's some pretty good stuff there. I think Will Porter comes on for a show, and we really do a good job digging through all the Russiagate nonsense. And so the split that the Russiagate was able to put between the Trump administration and Putin has been very significant. And while they were able to get a ceasefire-ish deal done in Syria, the relationship between Trump and Putin has not been enough to get, Russia and the United States to really work together on any other issues other than that very small ceasefire in Syria. So with the Democrats paying, the company that produced the Steele dossier, you would think this would be a bigger deal and bigger evidence of a, some kind of collusion between a candidate and Vladimir Putin or whatever else. But simply not the case, or, this is an example of the Clinton campaign trying to produce fake news to swing the election, which is in a lot of ways what the Democrats are now arguing that Russia does, that they're waging an information war against the United States. We've seen some other fallout of this, like Twitter stopping running ads for Sputnik and RT. I got some news on my favorite bill in Congress, that is H.Con.Res 81, which will end the United States war in Yemen, fighting on the side of Saudi Arabia. We will continue to fight the war against al-Qaeda, should this bill pass. There are now 39 co-sponsors of the bill. We just had one more added in the past couple of days. The plans to stop it are this: the Democratic whip is pushing Dems to stay away from the bill, and then the Republicans are trying to strip the bill of its privilege. I think the Democrats would rather not strip the bill of its privilege in case they ever wanted to put the brakes on something that Donald Trump was doing overseas. However, it seems like their big deal is just to prevent enough Democrats from signing on to the bill to get this thing passed. They really don't want it to happen, the establishment in both parties. We have the Supreme Leader of Iran announcing that Iran will cap their range on their ballistic missile program to 2,000 kilometers. That may sound like a lot, but Tehran, which is kind of in the center of Iran, is a kind of a decent measuring point from maybe where 2,000 kilometers from Iran is. So this would allow Iran's missiles to reach Ankara, Turkey, but not really get as far as Istanbul. The more Western European countries are well further away of 2,000 kilometers from Iran. 2,000 kilometers from Iran really is the border with Saudi Arabia. If Iran's able to, move their missile silos closer to their own border, 2,000 kilometers would maybe get them, well within range of all Saudi targets and the Yemeni targets, as well as maybe putting it right at the edge of the range if they wanted to attack the American base in Djibouti. Going north, this will put Iran's missiles in the range of southern Russia and the very, very kind of western portion of China, and all of it in India moving south. So it's not as much as it sounds like. 2,000 kilometers sounds like an awful lot, but, kilometers are not quite half a mile each, so it really adds up quick. 6/10 of a mile to a kilometer, so these distances aren't that far. While they are in range of a lot of U.S. targets, that's because the U.S. targets are in the Middle East, not because Iran could suddenly bomb all the U.S. bases in Western Europe, Japan, and in the United States. I was posting in a Facebook forum earlier today about, where I get my news, and I point out one of the decent places actually to find news is just within, from the embassies like U.S. Embassy in Syria or Lebanon or wherever else. Their Twitter account will often tell you what the U.S. activities in those countries are, much more than the mainstream media will ever report them. So I saw an interesting tweet from the U.S. Embassy to Lebanon that said that the United States has spent $1.5 billion in the past decade to arm and train Lebanese troops. This seemed to be a, kind of a bragging position, like, look at all we accomplished, although I'm not sure what the Lebanese army could do. The main fighting force in Lebanon is still Hezbollah, and the United States has attempted to undermine and sanction Hezbollah, not support it. We also had the United States announcing the delivery of 2 A-29 light attack aircraft to Lebanon. Apparently they're not going to use this to attack, but surveillance against Syria. I'm not sure to what extent this is really going to be helpful or not, and I'm not sure why there's suddenly a fire sale on A-29 light attack aircraft, but it seems like the United States is giving them to everyone all over the world. We had an apparent collapse at a North Korean nuclear site that killed up to 200 North Koreans, I guess possibly after the largest nuclear explosion that North Korea has set off on September 4th. Caused the tunnel to collapse, killing so many people and trapping about 100. While rescue efforts were underway, another collapse killed 100 of the rescuers, and I guess 200 people died in total. In Israel, we have the defense minister announcing a new police force in Israel. This will be a police force of about 200 police officers to guard and secure the Temple Mount. Although this, I think, should be concerning on people's radar because the actions of this police force could extend well beyond the Temple Mount. They said one of the main goals of this police force will be surveillance and to prevent attacks from occurring. Of course, a couple months ago, there was an attack where I believe 2 or 3 Israeli police were killed at the Temple Mount. I'm not sure how much Palestinian protests will meet the creation of this police force, and I don't think it will actually be enforcing anything until next year, but this certainly could be a huge power grab by the government of Israel and create a new force of people to attack and suppress the Palestinians. News from Catalonia. We have the Catalan President as well as his cabinet traveling to Belgium and remaining there as the Spanish government issues, charges against the cabinet and the president, including sedition and trying to, foment a revolution in the country. The mainstream media has really tried to portray this as this is kind of the end of the Catalonian independence bit. However, I don't know if that's the case. I think the president is doing everything he can to keep that alive, and if he remains in Catalonia, he feels he will be imprisoned. The Spanish court ordered them to appear in a court in Madrid on Friday. I highly doubt that they will show up. It seems to me that right now their goal is to try to garner some international support for the Catalan movement, because really the only thing that's going to stop Spain is some denunciation and sanctions from the rest of Europe at this point. Spain seems pretty hell-bent on keeping the Catalan people underneath Spanish control. News from Africa. We have 5 Malian soldiers being killed and then 1 civilian also being killed as a politician traveled across the desert out there and was killed by some jihadists, likely either ISIS or al-Qaeda. This again just goes to show the kind of problems that West Africa is facing and how, the U.S. has been intervening there for a long time. And so when people say, oh, we have to go chase the terrorists to West Africa, I think really what happened was, the Americans got there first. The State Department has issued a travel warning for Americans traveling to Nigeria, saying that there's a heightened chance of being kidnapped by an al-Qaeda or ISIS group if you're in that country. So obviously 800 troops being in Nigeria doesn't do anything to help Americans be more safe. The United States announced the capture of a militant outside of Benghazi, Libya, who was apparently responsible in part for the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. Of course, to this day, what really should be the big story from that 2012 attack was that it should have exposed the CIA program to send jihadists and guns to jihadists in Syria from Libya. However, because of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's dishonesty, the Americans feel like it's all just a, kind of hyped up Republican witch hunt against Barack Obama, when that really wasn't the case. There was legitimate treason going on in Benghazi, but, it was not the Republican portrayal that Obama wanted the, Ambassador Stevens to die while he held off the Marines or something like that. Tillerson and Mattis testified before Congress that the United States does not need additional war powers to carry out their war in Africa, believing that the 2001 authorization of use of military force provides them with all the authorization they need to wage a war in Africa. Very disturbing. This really should not be the case. It should be very obvious to everyone that Afghanistan, which is on the opposite side of Iran from Africa, the far side is, much borders China, and this is Africa here, and this is not the same war at all whatsoever. And then the other interesting news is that we have Mattis saying that the United States soldiers that were killed in Niger were not even there under 2001 AUMF authority, but were there under Section 10 authority. I tried to figure out what Section 10 authority was, but to be honest, it's too much legal code stuff. So if anybody knows anything about that, let me know. I'm going to try to throw that question out there to a few people who know a little bit more about it and see if they have any idea of what Section 10 authorities were. In Iraq, as well as the big story being the death of the Kurdish independence movement, we also have pretty good signals that the Iraqi Kurds may be losing their autonomy too. For the longest time, the Iraqi Kurds existed almost as an independent state from the Iraqi government. I think they paid some taxes, protection to the mob boss, but were generally left alone to carry out their culture, practices, and economy as they so chose. However, with the independence bid, I guess that was kind of the one thing they were not allowed to do, and now are looking at losing their autonomy. They are also losing a lot of their relationship with the Kurdish government that for a long time allowed the Kurds to directly pump money from gas from Iraqi Kurdistan into Turkey, even against the wishes of the Iraqi government. The independence referendum has certainly turned the Turkish government against the Iraqi Kurds and has really created a lot of problems for the Iraqi Kurds. The Iraqi government now controls a key border crossing between Turkey and Iraq, and apparently has Iraqi forces stationed at all the border crossings between Turkey and Iraqi Kurdistan. The other situation we have going on in Baghdad is that we have the United States asking the Iraqi militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces, to break up. So far from the Iraqi from the Iraqi government and militia leaders, they're saying we're absolutely not going to do that and kind of telling the U.S. to go to hell. Mattis, for his part, is telling Iraq to go to hell and that we're going to stay there with or without their consent. Or actually, I believe Tillerson said that, not Mattis. In Syria, we have U.S. Major General James Jarrard saying that the United States has 4,000 troops in Syria. That's well over the cap of 503 Barack Obama set, and the last official number we got from the Pentagon, which was 500. So, this is an invasion force, right? The United States now has 4,000 troops in Syria with absolutely no welcoming from the Syrian government for them to be there. And the Syrian government actually expresses that they don't want them there. And so this should be a huge problem. I don't know if it will be. Last story I have is that in Afghanistan, we have the United States, I guess, admitting to killing two, not necessarily civilians, but two members of their own army, the Northern Alliance. I guess one guy went home and gotten engaged to a girl, and they were having an engagement party, and a U.S. airstrike blew up the fighter for the Northern Alliance as well as a 13-year-old boy. Alright, so that'll wrap up my show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, rating and review on iTunes, libertarianinstitute.org, and Kyle's Files is the Facebook page. There's also a Facebook page featuring my show, The Libertarian Union. There's a lot of great podcasts over there. You guys should all go check that out if you already haven't. You find my work at kylesfilesblog.com, and the Twitter handle is at KYAAALE. Thanks, everyone.